approaches to truth. The biblical approach had the unity of truth, reason, the absolute is the Bible, and through reason from God is revealed. In His light we see light, as it says in Psalm 36:9. Traditional Western humanism acknowledged there's a unity of truth, and they believed that they could understand reality, but they had to come up with their own absolute. And to come up with their own absolute, they recognized that the problem with not knowing what was right or wrong is because we were subject to our ideas that we have in our own minds. And so if I'm subject to the ideas that I have in my own mind, I may have some wrong ideas, and then I'll reason from those wrong ideas, and I'll end up with some wrong conclusions, and I'll end up thinking that something is true, which is actually false. And something else which is false, I'll reason to think it's true. And so they recognized the need then of trying to have an approach to verify what is true, which eliminated subjectivity. And so an absolute must be free from subjectivity. And this is where people look to science, believing that science was independent of subjectivity. Independent of subjectivity. Now, for science to investigate, science must have, science can investigate which realm? All right, science can investigate the phenomenal realm, can't it? Because science can investigate something that you can gather physical information on. If you can smell it or hear it or taste it or touch it, you can gather facts about it through your physical senses. So science is dependent upon the physical senses, and everything that science does is through the physical senses. So science cannot investigate the phenomenal realm, but the noumenal realm is above and beyond the grasp of the physical senses, right? So science cannot gather any data about the noumenal realm. Can't investigate the noumenal realm. Science can't investigate the noumenal. Therefore, in order to look to science as to be the absolute, to verify what's true for all of our life, people must assume, they must have the presupposition that only the phenomenal exists, there is nothing noumenal. And so this is a presupposition. This is a presupposition that people would have to choose. Now they would choose that idea with no scientific basis for it. Science could give you no basis for that idea. And it would be something that you would have to just choose and have faith in and believe to be true in order to have science be an absolute. Because you would have to have all of reality subject to the investigation of science. And then the idea was that science would gather facts and the facts speak for themselves. Have a dog, his name is Fact, and I say, speak Fact, woof woof, thank you Fact. All right? And so the facts would speak for themselves. The idea here is that science, through the method of gathering data, has eliminated any effects of human thinking from the process. And because human thinking has been eliminated from the process of gathering facts, therefore there's no possibility of the answers being brought about to be wrong because of some wrong views that the person had. So we have to ask the question, is science free from subjectivity? All right? And the answer is no. And there are 5 areas in which subjectivity affects the activity of science, where subjectivity enters into science. And what are those 5 areas? I want to take them in a particular order. First of all, science, the scientist must decide his procedure. All right, and if he sets the procedure up wrongly, the conclusions he gets will be wrong. And now we can look at actual illustrations of this, scientific situations where this has happened just to illustrate the problem. For one scientific investigation back in the late 1700s, about 1780, there was a wonderful scientist named Robert Boyle, who was investigating to see if he could discover what fire was, what was happening in the process of fire. Now, and there was a particular theory that was popular at that particular time, that that fire was what was happening. There was a substance called phlogiston, which was in every solid substance, and whenever phlogiston left from matter, that phlogiston leaving resulted in the flames you see and the heat you feel. It was phlogiston left and resulted in the light, giving off light and heat. And so Robert Boyle didn't believe the phlogiston theory to be correct, and so he wanted to do an investigation. And what he would need to do to show that would be that if fire was a result of phlogiston leaving, if you have something leaving, after it left, it wouldn't be as heavy as it was before, right? And so he took a strip of tin, put it inside of a bottle, and closed the bottle up tight. So there was air in the bottle and tin in that bottle. And then he set this bottle over the top of a fire. So we have this fire burning underneath the bottle here. And when the tin got hot enough inside, it burned. And then you have nothing but this, the ashes there in the bottle. Then he took the bottle off the flame and let it cool. Now he'd weighed the bottle before he put it on the fire. And then he put the top on and set it on and burned the tin. Then he took it back off. When it cooled, he took the top off and he weighed it again. But this time, the bottle weighed more than it did before. And that was puzzling, because if phlogiston was leaving, the bottle should have gotten lighter. But instead, it got heavier. And so that immediately, for something to get heavier, that throws out the idea that there's such a thing as phlogiston that's leaving. And so you have to try to account for why did it get heavier. Now, Robert Boyle said, well, the only way it can get heavier is something has got to have gone in and combined with the tin. But it's all sealed up tight. But now, of course, you see the windows, and light can come right through windows. I don't know how light comes right through glass. But if light can come right through glass, maybe there's some particles that are in those flames that are tiny enough to go right through glass too, just like light does. And he presented the possibility of there being fire particles, and fire particles went through the glass and combined with the tin, and so fire consisted of fire particles. And the fire particles combining with the tin resulted in the ashes. Well, about 20 years later, about 1801, Lavoisier, a French scientist, read through the reports that Robert Boyle had written up, and he said, I want to do this again, but he did it a little bit, just changed the procedure one way. He says, I'm going to put the top on and then weigh the bottle, burn the tin, and take it off and weigh it again before I take the top off. So he took the top, he took it over and he weighed it, and when he weighed it, it weighed exactly the same before the fire as it did after the fire. Well, if the weight hadn't changed, and it says that shows that what Robert Boyle has presented cannot be the correct answer, and it's not fire particles. Then he took the top off, and when he took the top off, the weight increased, and then it weighed the same as what Robert Boyle had measured. And so that showed that the weight increase had resulted from the atmosphere, so that something in the air had combined with the tin, leaving a partial vacuum in the bottle, and you take the top off and some more air goes into the bottle, and that explains the weight increase. And so he knew that fire had to be the result of something that was in the air combining with the tin. And so then he begins a series of investigations to find out what air is composed of. And in the process of that, he discovers the existence of an atom called oxygen. And this is the first time that we know of in history where people were aware of the existence of oxygen, and had verified that had identified and isolated there's something here that exists called oxygen. So if you have a wrong procedure, you're going to end up with the wrong conclusions. But if science has a possibility of ending up the wrong conclusions, then you ultimately cannot say absolutely when you can rely upon it and when you can't. It's always a possibility of something being wrong. But an absolute cannot be wrong. So science cannot be an absolute. Okay, secondly, the scientist must decide what experiments to do. Robert Boyle didn't know that he had to be doing experiments with oxygen because he didn't even know oxygen existed. And so when there's things that may be there that you don't know about, you don't even know, you have to do experiments to see if those are involved. With our limited perspective of reality, see, you can make a wrong decision about what experiments to do, you can be wrong in your procedure, and see, these are both an aspect of subjectivity, aren't they? Which shows that there's a limitation to science in the phenomenal realm. It can be wrong. A third area in which you have this limitation is you must you're subject to your own observations. And the observations of our physical senses are not absolutely reliable. And one time I was sitting in my car in a traffic light in Phoenix, Arizona, waiting for the traffic light to turn green. I sensed my car, I was coasting backwards. I looked in my rearview mirror, and there was a car right behind. And I put my foot on the brake so I wouldn't coast into the car behind me. And my car still kept on going. I couldn't get it stopped. And I remember I put both feet on my brake, and I was pushing just as hard on that brake with both feet as I could push. And I couldn't get my car to stop. And I was panicking. And I was all ready to, at any second, to be bumping the bumper of the car behind me and them blowing their horn at me. And then I looked up and saw the light was green. And I looked at the car on each side of me, and I noticed they were going forward. And I had been sitting still the whole time, but I had this sensation that I was coasting backwards, but I'd been sitting still, and those cars were moving instead. See, and so observations that I thought I had were fooled. And so physical observations are not absolutely reliable, are they? Now see, when I put a white coat on and go into a scientific laboratory, that problem does not go away. And so that brings in another aspect of subjectivity into the scientific procedure. And then there is the area of accepting data as fact. Now there are facts all throughout the world. You know, this is a fact that we're in this room, and here's this chair here, and here's a pen in my hand, and the lights are in the ceiling. See, there are facts that are just plain common sense things. But on the other hand, there are some things too that when you're doing an investigation in science, you have to you do experiments over and over enough times. And if you get the same result every time, finally, it just has to be a decision. The science said, well, we've got the same results every time, so it must be we're gathering right information here. But see, it wouldn't have mattered how many times Robert Boyle did his experiment when he was measuring the weight of that jar with the top off. He'd get the same results every time, but he wouldn't be getting accurate information in regard to what was really happening, you see. And you're accepting data as facts which are not reliable because of a mistake in procedure. And so to identify a particular data as being fact is an aspect of a decision that the scientist must make is subject to him, and he can be wrong. And then the scientist evaluates his conclusions based upon evaluates the facts based upon his presuppositions. Scientist evaluates data on the basis of his presuppositions. Now let's take, for example, do a scientific investigation of just gathering data about animals and people, and you look at all the cows and you see all cows have lungs, and then you examine people and you see that people have lungs. And if you start from a presupposition of evolution, that things were evolving through a chain of events, the way you would evaluate that data then would be, say, well, it makes sense that cows have lungs and people have lungs because the cows and people both came from a common ancestor that had lungs, and so we've evolved from common ancestry, and therefore we both have lungs. And then you put that data in a framework or a viewpoint of evolution. And if you begin from a biblical set of presuppositions that God is the creator and created categories of creation, then you begin with the idea that God is a reasonable God who does things in an orderly way, and there's a sufficient reason for what he does. And he created cows to live in an atmosphere needing oxygen, created people in an atmosphere needing oxygen, and so people and cows are both created in a common environment with a common need for oxygen, and so he gave them a common design of lungs. And that's the expression of a sensible, intelligent, loving God who just simply created people and cows with lungs because they have a common need for that, you see. And so the presuppositions give the framework in which we interpret or evaluate the data that we accept. Okay, so the conclusion is science cannot eliminate subjectivity. So science can be wrong, and it's not absolute. Science cannot be a reference point to absolutely verify what is true, because it can't eliminate the problem of subjectivity. All right, so let's just stop here and see if you have any questions. All right, let's go back and review to look at the situation of the approaches to verifying truth. And the biblical approach was a recognition there's a unity of truth because we had a reasonable God who created things in a loving way, and so God did not create a universe to be self-destructive. And truth, which is a description of reality, then would not contradict itself, and so something that is true in one area of study will be consistent with truth in another field of study. There's a unity of truth. God created us in His image so that we can understand, and so He wants us to understand, and in Isaiah 1:18 He says, "Come, let us reason together." God wants us to be able to understand Him and understand His ways and understand ourselves, understand the world in which we live. But we must begin with the revealed presuppositions that come from the Word of God, the revelation, the absolute, for verifying what is true. The traditional Western humanism recognized the unity of truth and the need of reason, but they denied that the Bible is absolute. They were looking to come up with their own absolute, to be operating independently from God. And the attempt of beginning about the end of the 1700s was to look to science to be the source of that absolute. And it just became kind of the culturally accepted thing is if science says something and the Bible says something else, and obviously the Bible's wrong and science is right, which has the idea to it that science is what verifies what is true, right? So if the Bible and the science were to disagree, then I'm going to have to believe science and throw out the Bible. And that is the idea that comes from that without thinking it through, that science is the absolute. Science is a wonderful tool of investigation, and science began because there were Christians who believed that God was a reasonable God who created in a loving way, created the world, and therefore the orderliness of His reason was round about the creation, and therefore we can investigate in creation and discover the orderliness that was there and state those in what are called physical laws. And physical laws are a description of the way things normally occur in the physical realm. And it's always going to be that way, except God temporarily sets it aside in a given situation by doing a particular miracle. And so we have these physical laws of gravity, these descriptions of the orderliness of the universe that are there because God has done things in an orderly way. And so the biblical view of reality was the basis for the foundations of science. And the early scientists were all Christians were operating from this biblical perspective of the world. But when people tried then to take science, instead of being this wonderful tool of investigation, said it's also going to be our absolute to verify what is true, then we see that science cannot, while it's a wonderful tool of investigation, it cannot be the absolute because it cannot eliminate the problem of subjectivity. In 1958, a scientist named Michael Polanyi wrote a book called Personal Knowledge. And in this book, Personal Knowledge, he discusses the problem of subjectivity to science and shows the problem that science has with subjectivity. And so over a process of time, more and more people have just realized, as they've come to realize that science cannot be the absolute, and they've thought about hundreds of years, mankind trying to come up with their own absolute had been unsuccessful in doing it. Many finally came to the conclusion that if science has failed now, it must be there's nothing else to look for. It must be there are no absolutes. And if you have to have an absolute in order to verify what is true, and you cannot come up with a reference point to verify what is true, then there is no, if there are no absolutes, you cannot know what is true, and then that means there is no certainty of any knowledge. And the knowledge that is most important to us is the knowledge of the meaning of my own life, the things that I value the most in terms of my significance, and why is it that all people love and long to be loved. What is the meaning to love? If you began, there'd be no hope of any understanding of myself. No, I lost all certainty of being able to know if anything is true. And if you cannot prove that anything is true, then education couldn't be a process of learning truth. Education could only be the process of a pursuit of truth. And so you're pursuing after something which you never could say with certainty that you have, because you have no way of verifying with certainty that you have it. And so you're simply involved in a pursuit of truth. And if you're involved in a pursuit of truth, then that's like saying that there's a bus at the corner at the bus stop, and I need to get on that bus to get to my destination. And so I walk up the sidewalk to get to that bus, and just before I get there, the bus starts leaving. And so I start running down the street after the bus, but the bus is going faster than I am. And somebody yells out to me, "What are you doing running on the street? I've got to get on that bus." "Well, can't you see the bus is going faster than you are and you never catch it?" "Yes." "Well, why are you pursuing it then?" "Because I'm in pursuit of bus. I have to be on that bus to get to my destination." "Well, why are you pursuing something that you never can get?" "Well, because I have to be in pursuit of bus." "Well, why are you," and then similarly, if you're going and studying an education, "Why are you studying what you're studying?" "Well, because I'm in the pursuit of truth." "Well, can you ever know with certainty that you got truth?" "No, I can't, because I don't have any absolute." "Well, why are you in the pursuit of truth if you get it and you never know if you got it?" "Well, because I'm studying, and the purpose of education is to be in the pursuit of truth." And so here then is a sense of a feel of it's hopeless to be able to know if you ever know anything or not. One man was attending a parent-teachers association, a PTA meeting, in school meeting in California, and that night at that PTA meeting, they expressed in the meeting that they were never to tell their students, the teachers were never to tell their students in their class that they were wrong, because if you told them they were wrong, maybe you're wrong instead of them, and 5 years later you'll discover that they were right and you're wrong. And because you never can have any certainty of verifying what is true, because you can't do that with an absolute. And then secondly, you should never tell that they're wrong, because you'll hurt their self-image. See, now for a Christian, my self-image is not based on the fact of me being right. My self-image acceptance is based on the realization that God created me in His image for the purpose of love relationship with Him, and God loves me whether I have a wrong view about something or not. Is that right? And so only Christianity can give the security where you can just relax and talk about truth and be able to admit if you're wrong. See? All right, but if you say, well, it must be there are no absolutes, then without an absolute you don't have any hope of knowing what is true. And people have come into a place of hopelessness then, or another word for hopelessness is a despair. It's an intellectual despair of giving up any hope of being able to verify with any certainty or understand the meaning of their life, to understand anything that they consider to be ultimately important. Be able to answer with, or very simply to answer with certainty the question, why should I be alive? can I have an understanding of the reason for my existence and be able to explain that out, and to know that I know that I know that that is the right answer. So if you want to look in this area of despair, Doug Nagel's going to come, and he's going to talk with us a little bit about the expressions of this despair, this hopelessness that are expressed in this 20th century culture.
Verby, I guess. Well, as Larry said, well, I'm not even going to go into what I'm talking about. First of all, I'd like to begin the class with a riddle, okay? Now, what I'd like each of you to do is I want you to pay very close attention to this riddle, okay? Yes, Larry, I'm moving over. I want you to pay very close attention to this riddle. Each detail is very important, and I'm going to ask you a question at the end. And you should be able to answer that question on the basis of all the details that I gave you, okay? So, first of all, you're driving a 1984 purple Ford Escort, okay? And you'll notice that it has a sunroof. Nice little picture, isn't it? Isn't that neat? Okay, you got to remember the sunroof. It's very important. Okay? And you're driving along, and it's a back road, okay? Way out in the middle of nowhere. And it's a gravel road, and you have trees on both sides of the road, okay? And you look up through your sunroof, and you see the sky. Nice sky, isn't it? You'll see that half of the sky is cloudy, so you can't see the stars. And half of it isn't, so you can see the stars, and we have a crescent moon. Okay? Now, do you have all this down so far? You got the sunroof, the back road, the trees, half cloudy, half starry, and a crescent moon. You got that? And all of a sudden, you've been driving almost exactly 10 miles. Okay? It's almost exactly in the 10th mile. And it's almost exactly at 10 p.m. All of a sudden, your hood flies open and your trunk. Your engine quits, all of your tires go flat, and your windows blow out. Now, with all of that information, how many pancakes does it take to shingle a doghouse? Now the sunroof is very, very important. The sunroof, you should be able to answer this question. Lisa, do you know? It doesn't take any silly because bananas don't have bones. You guys don't get that? Well, I just thought I'd give you a little illustration of what it feels like to be in despair. Despair, exactly what is it? It's a feeling of hopelessness. I don't know how you guys felt when I told you that joke. I go through every detail. You're keeping it in your mind, and all of a sudden you discover there's absolutely no meaning whatsoever to everything I just said. Well, that's the way a lot of people in the world today are. They're wondering, what is my purpose and what's my significance in life? Why am I here? You know, they're in total despair and total hopelessness. And there's a couple of pretty good reasons why they would feel that way. And the first pretty good reason that I can see is the reasoning from a presupposition that there are no absolutes. Okay? And when they do that, they're going against reality. And so what do they have to do? You know, they don't like God's absolutes because it confines them. So they say that there's no absolutes, but they can't live consistently with that. So what do people do? They try to make their own absolutes. A lot of this you just studied with Larry. I'm just kind of going over some of the stuff that he already did. They tried to make up their own absolutes, and in terms of Western society, Western man, he decided he wanted to use science as his absolute. But just as Larry said, you know, he went through the 5 reasons of why science can't be the absolute. And we look at the conclusions that science is coming to. Some of the conclusions, or the presuppositions, are evolution, which states that all of us as individuals are just a product of time plus chance plus matter. I don't think I wrote that down, but I just wrote down we're a bunch of molecules put together by chance. I mean, if you think about it, you've got a bunch of matter that is just sitting out in the universe, a bunch of molecules, and just by chance they collided together to make a human being. And that causes a pretty big problem. Because of the question that people were asking, what is my significance, or what is my purpose for existence, and the result of the presupposition of evolution is that there is no meaning or no significance to my life. You know, I'm just a bunch of molecules. There's no purpose for me being here. I'm an accident. So it causes feelings of despair. Which would lead a person to ask, why is it worth it for me to go through the pain of life? All I am is an accident. Life is very hurtful. Why should I go through this? You know, I'm not really going to make a difference because there's no reason for me being here anyway. So why go through the pain? It isn't even worth it. Which would finally lead to suicide. I wanted to look at a couple of these. Did you guys, have they gotten to chapter 6 yet? There's some pretty wild things about, and see, it's on page 31 in your book. If you want to follow along, it's the bottom paragraph. Because of all the presuppositions that I've given, you know, life is just meaningless, everything is just absurd. There's a message of a play. It's called Theater of the Absurd. It is nothing more than a whole series of unrelated phrases. The play stresses that because man exists by chance, it is even impossible to communicate. This is because communication is purposeful, orderly, structuring of thoughts, but chance is neither purposeful nor orderly. Thus the purpose of the play is to communicate that there is no communication. Strangely, they express their idea wonderfully, even though it is impossible to communicate. Which just goes to show that this idea and this presupposition is inconsistent with reality. You know, they can't even live consistently with that when they're trying to communicate that there is no communication. And getting back to the subject of suicide, I guess I kind of got off track there. But there's a man named Viktor, is that Frankl? Is that how you say that? Viktor Frankl, who lived during World War II in German concentration camps. And he was just making some observations about the world around him, the people in these concentration camps, and the torture that the people were going through. And the torture wasn't necessarily physical torture, it was psychological and spiritual. He would tell a story about the soldiers would make them take this pile of dirt, put it in wheelbarrows and move it all the way to the other side of the camp. And then the next day, they would take that same pile of dirt and move it all the way back to where it was before. And they would do it back and forth every day. And people would go crazy because they were in total despair. They didn't know why they were there. This is true despair because there was no purpose. And one of the quotes that really hit me that Frankl said is that any man can endure the how if he knows the why, which I think I have down here. Yeah. Any man can endure the how if he knows the why. Which, you know, when applied to everyday life, if you know why you're here specifically for a relationship with God, which is never going to fail. God's always going to be there. He's constantly faithful. You can go through anything. It doesn't matter what you go through because you're dependent on a totally faithful God who's never going to fail you. And there is no despair because you know the why. So you can always endure the how. Okay, and then a second problem I wanted to look at was the problem of guilt. They're reasoning from the presupposition that there are no absolutes and you can make up your own right and wrong. And yet, they're experiencing guilt when they do something wrong. When they do something that goes against their design, they experience guilt and they don't know why. And how do you deal with guilt? You either have to suppress it or it will drive you crazy. And the solution to this, obviously, because we do have a design and there are absolutes, the only solution to that is, I guess I didn't write the whole thing down. But anyway, repent and experience God's forgiveness. For as it says in Proverbs 24:14, I don't know if you want to turn to that. I didn't bring my Bible up here. So, anybody want to read that?
I will.
Okay.
What?
Go for it.
Proverbs 24:14. Know also that wisdom is sweet to your soul. If you find it, there is a future hope for you, and your hope will not be cut off.
If you find God's wisdom, which is the only true wisdom there is going to be hope and there will be no despair. Despair is hopelessness. You're constantly trying to find truth in all the wrong places. But if you look to the one hope, which is God, there will always be a future hope for you. You'll never be in despair. And so, well, that's pretty much all of chapter 6 that I got out of it. I don't know if Larry wants to add anything or if there's any questions.
All right, now Doug has talked about the despair. Now let's think about the extent of the despair. The recent studies concerning teenagers in the United States talks about suicide being the #1 cause of death among teenagers in the United States. And suicide, when you look at where suicide is occurring most in the world, it's occurring in the industrialized nations, not in the third world nations. So in nations where it is harder to live and you have less of the conveniences and comforts of life, the suicide epidemic is not as low as it is in the first world nations where, on the average, it's easier to live. So the thing relating to suicide does not relate to the difficulty of problems, but our ability to handle problems. And the same problems that we have and the teenagers have in this generation, their parents had 30 years ago. The proportions may be different, but they were still confronted with the same problems, and yet the rate of suicide today is different from what it was a generation, 2 generations ago. And the thing that has changed is the intellectual basis. It goes back again to remember Viktor Frankl's statement that Doug referred to. Any man can endure the how if he knows the why. If you can find for yourself a sufficient intelligent reason for getting through something, or you will find a way to get through it. And every 90 seconds someone is committing suicide or attempting suicide. And they don't have a basis. Now you can imagine a person is hurting. Maybe they have just had a broken romantic relationship, or their parents have gotten a divorce, and they just have the hurt because of the fragmentation that they're experiencing, or they're trying to decide what to do in the rest of their life, and they want to do something meaningful and significant in their life. They really would like their life to count for something, because you have this drive for significance and really accomplish something purposeful. And you don't have any basis for defining what is it that I really ought to do that really would make a difference, that would be worth doing. What is worth my life being invested in? And you don't have a basis for answering the question. And then you say, now why is it that I'm really alive? And you can't answer the question of why am I alive? And everybody says, don't worry about being alive, just go out and party and have a good time. And now you're hurting so deeply inside. And you're not having a good time. And you say, I don't like this being alive, I just like to get out of this. Why don't I just kill myself? And you don't have any sufficient intelligent reason to answer the question, why should I be alive? And so suicide has become epidemic. And we have a foundational presuppositional problem to lay back, to be able to explain why our life has meaning, why we have purpose, and how do we know that these things are true. So we have a very fundamental foundational problem in the area of epistemology today, the way to verify what is really true, and for people to really believe that it is true, and not just something that people want to believe because they want to believe something. Most people think that people that are involved in religion are just in religion because they want to be in religion, because they chose to do something that was good for them. And it was just a nice, cool thing for them to do. And there's no certainty of anything. But the testimony of the problem that is there is because in this generation, suicide has become epidemic. And people cannot live in that state of, when you are in a state of despair, you will either move to destructiveness or to suicide. If they move to destructiveness, they'll identify with a painter named Karl Appel, and he declared, I do not paint, I hit. Or to suicide, to just escape. There's no reason why I should be alive. I don't like being alive, and I hurt, and I'm just going to end it. Now, people who are not going to be not moving to nihilism or destructiveness, or moving to suicide, they're looking for some other way out. And if we can't have a way out of our understanding, maybe I can come into some kind of truth that would be independent from explanation, independent from understanding, and we'll talk about that next time. All right, in the past we've talked about there's a different approach to knowing, a different approach to finding out what's true. There's 3 different approaches. So one is the biblical approach. The biblical approach believes that there's a unity of truth, and that God has created a universe, and truth is a description of reality, and God doesn't contradict himself, and so the truth is non-contradictory. Truth fits together in a unity of truth. And God created us in an image because he wants to talk with us and communicate. He wants us to understand, and so his truth is reasonable, it's understandable, and he wants us to teach us his ways. But we need to have God to help us, because we're tiny created beings. My brain fits right inside my head, and there's such a huge realm of knowledge that I don't know. I need a foundation of presuppositions from which to begin. I need a reference point so I can have a place of checking out my beliefs to verify what is true. And so God has given us a revelation of the Bible. to bring truth to us, that we might have a foundation from which to build our understanding and structure our lives. And then as we build on that understanding of truth, God just brings out and transforms all the rest of our lives from that, because ideas have consequences. And Proverbs 23 verse 7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Now, traditional Western humanism, now recall the definition of humanism as man starting with man to build for himself a worldview and philosophy of life that leaves out God in any divine dimension. So he's decided to leave out God. He's decided to go his own way and try to solve all of his problems by himself. One national leader said all of man's problems were created by man and can be solved by man. And he's gone on to just to be his own way then, but nevertheless he had the idea there was a unity of truth, just as we have in the biblical view. And he wanted to understand and had extreme confidence in his reasoning, in his own mind, to be able to solve all situations. But he held to the idea of reason, and truth was understandable. And he knew he needed an absolute. The problem was, what was that absolute? Where would you find that? And he rejected the Bible and was looking to try to come up with an absolute. So man starting with man to build for himself a worldview and philosophy of life. And never came up with an absolute. The last couple hundred years, the focus had been on science, and generally we had confidence that if science could prove some things to be true, and if the science and the Bible disagreed, then you would hold to the science and consider must be the Bible's wrong there. But science would be the absolute to verify what is true. And in 1958, Michael Polanyi wrote a book called Personal Knowledge, and he shows the problem of subjectivity is related to science as well. And we talked about in the last session how that affects the problem of science, and that why science cannot give an absolute guarantee that everything that it does is right. And science can make mistakes too. So at that point then, there were many that said, well, if people have worked for hundreds of years and haven't come up with an absolute, it must be that there are no absolutes. There must be, there is no way that I can come to any answers about my life, any way that I can just say with absolute certainty that my life has meaning and what I'm doing is significant. And when I think from the framework of what, if everything is just molecules, if there's no spiritual realm that exists, and then all we are is in a physical universe of molecules, and I'm a collection of molecules, and everything we see in the molecules round about us is controlled by physical forces, is controlled by causations. And these causations, this arrangement has been produced by chance. There's a man named Jacques Monod who committed to the idea of evolution. He's declared that man realizes now that, like a gypsy, he lives on the boundary of an alien world. A world that is deaf to his music, just as indifferent to his hopes as it is to his suffering or his crimes. Man knows at last that he is alone in the universe's unfeeling immensity out of which he emerged only by chance. Now, if we've come to exist by chance, then we just happen to be here as an accident, because that just happens to be the way it turned out. But if I'm here by accident, then there is no reason for being here. And if perchance by accident I was not here, what difference would it make? And it just has the idea here of just the physical world, and this confidence in this framework of this approach of evolution became so strong. 1859, Darwin wrote his book on the origin of the species. In 1959, the 100-year celebration of that, Julian Huxley proclaimed very strongly, the first point to make about Darwin's theory is that it is no longer a theory, but a fact. Okay, but if evolution is true, Then SU is only molecules, you see. So let's draw a picture of SU here. Okay, it's only molecules. And physical forces cause her every activity. And this just makes her like a robot, because that's what a robot is, you see, just physical forces causing physical substances to do what they do. Gravity causes the pen to fall. And every aspect of the physical realm is controlled in that way. So what kind of a picture does that give us then of one another? But this had become a very strong hold because that came out extending with science. Robert Blakey writes in the comments about it in his book, Secular Christianity and God Who Acts, he says, "The tendency for the wise and cultured people of the world was to dismiss with scorn the claim made by Christians that in the Bible they have a special source of sure and certain knowledge." And so having rejected the Bible, and they just said, we won't accept that Christian view, and therefore we'll have to come up with our own absolute, and that was suppressing of science. And Friedrich Schleiermacher was recognizing the problem this was bringing to religion, and Schleiermacher wanted, I presume, to maintain the relevance of Christianity to our modern world. And so he's working with the idea of not necessarily having to have the Bible be correct about science. It still could be authoritative about religion. So as early as 1799, Friedrich Schleiermacher said religion must quit arguing with science. Let science verify facts about the world. Put religion into the realm of feeling, because feelings need not kneel down to facts. So religion moved a little toward unprovable subjectivity. Now this is a tearing apart of the idea of subjectivity and objectivity, right? In other words, now understand subjectivity and objectivity. Recall the definition of the word subjectivity means my views, my opinions, and objectivity means that there has real existence outside the realm of my mind. And we should be, and if you have a relationship of subjectivity and objectivity together, you know that in a relationship of subjectivity and objectivity together, that my opinions about that clock over there on the wall must actually match with the way that clock is. So there is a connection between subjectivity and objectivity. But if you have science talking about the objective world about you, and you have feelings that about religion that are totally contradictory to those things that you see round about you, then you've brought a divorce between subjectivity and objectivity, and you've just moved into a realm of unprovable subjectivity that you just feel good about, and you decide you're going to believe it just because you feel good about it, and it doesn't have to line up with anything else. So science and the Bible don't have to match together. And in 1840, about that period of time, is about the center or the focal point of Kierkegaard's life. Soren Kierkegaard, a Dane in Denmark, he says, "The thing is to understand myself, to see what God really wishes me to do." And I would assume that he really, I assume his intentions are exactly to do that. He's really focused on being a Christian, and he says the important thing is to see as an individual what God wants me to do as an individual. And I'd have no disagreement of that whatever, because the most important thing of our lives is to do the will of God, the specific direction that God gives us individually, isn't it? The thing is to find the idea for which I can live and die. What would be the use of discovering so-called objective truth, of working through all the systems of philosophy, if it had no deeper significance for me and for my life? And that's very true. The Bible is calling us into a genuine experience of relationship with God, isn't it? He's calling us to walk with Him in newness, not just to memorize information about the Bible so you can answer all the Bible questions and have all this intellectual knowledge that has no application in your life, an application in your relationship with God, an application in your ministry. So we don't want to just have to be able to memorize a lot of things and be able to answer all the questions on some TV program like Jeopardy about the Bible, and not have it ever become real in our lives. It's got to have a deeper significance in our life. But the problem here is if a person takes this and says, well, then the objective realm it doesn't matter. It's just only that I find a deeper significance in my life, and it's just true for me, and I don't worry about anything else. See, we'll come back to this in just a bit more, but in just a little bit. But let me state right now again that Christianity is genuine, personal, or genuine subjective experience with God, but it's based upon objective evidence. It's based upon a reality of God who's outside of my mind, and a reality in which I live, and so that my own personal significance corresponds with the objective reality that's round about me, that's outside of my own feelings, outside of my opinions, outside of my views. And so what is happening here, as there's focusing and a stress upon a personal deeper significance, there becomes a loss of recognition also of the need that truth is a description of reality that's outside of ourselves, and that the two must go together hand in hand. So Kierkegaard went too far because he did not inseparably link together or keep tied permanently together subjectivity, objectivity, faith, and reason. Like a pendulum moving to its opposite extreme, he reacted against objectivity and reason and shouted, "Truth is subjectivity." So ultimate truth it becomes truth when it becomes real to you, and that must makes it truth. Robert Brettel comments regarding Kierkegaard that for Kierkegaard, knowledge and faith are polar opposites. You can have knowledge over here, you can have faith over here, but they have nothing to do with each other. One of the things that Kierkegaard declared then, in just challenging people to relationship with God, was to make a blind leap of faith. You couldn't know whether something was true or not until you committed yourself to it and leaped into it, and then, having made a leap of faith, you'd come to a knowledge through faith of it then. So the idea is like if you're blindfolded, you cannot see anything, and you start walking, and you walk into your bathroom and go to the medicine cabinet, open the door, and reach in to get some medicine, and hope that you got medicine and not poison that you take. And that would be a blind reach of faith, wouldn't it? So in a blind leap of faith, there is no way to know if you should believe what you believe. There's no standard. You simply must blindly decide what is true for you. And this, of course, divorces subjectivity from objectivity. This is different from biblical Christianity, because biblical Christianity is genuine, subjective experience with Jesus Christ based upon objective truth, based upon an objective reality. It's based upon the reality that God is there, and there's a specific design to what God is like. And so we must correspond in our relationship to Him. We have to relate to God for who He truly is. You know, Jesus truly is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. He's the ruler of the whole universe, and so I'm going to have to relate to Him as the Lord, the ruler of my life. I can't have a supposed relationship with Jesus that doesn't correspond to the nature of who He really is. Can I suppose that I'm really in relationship with God when He's the King of the whole universe and I refuse to submit to Him as King of my own life? Genuine subjective experience with Jesus based upon the objective reality, the objective truth. My faith, my religious faith must be a reality. It must be a trust in, a dependency upon, a commitment to the God who is really there. And so therefore we have a verifiable experience where we keep our hearts in the holiness of His love. in the framework of God's intelligence. There's something about that phrase that I just get excited about. It just verifiable experience, where we keep our hearts in the holiness of His love, where we keep our hearts in the holiness of His love, in the framework of God's intelligence. So God is bringing us our intelligence, our subjectivity, into line with His intelligence, so that we walk in the holiness of His love and we live in His intelligence. And there's a correspondence between my own personal experience and His intelligence, which is outside of me, and He teaches me, and we walk together in relationship. Experiential, verifiable experience. Let's take a break here just for a second. Just read through that. If we bring a separation between subjectivity and objectivity, then we bring a experience with God, or that's something that's called experience with God, but just simply ends up being whatever we want it to be, and there's no definition to it. It's assuming that there is a way of living, and there are no walls, there is no world about you, and it just brings reality right in to just be something that's in just my own head, my own mind. And so, just in looking and thinking, what would it be like if faith and reason had no relationship together? If there was no relationship between subjectivity and objectivity? Are faith and truth really beyond any objective evidence? If so, a Hindu's belief that Vishnu is God, or a Muslim's belief that Allah is God, or an atheist's belief that there is no God, could all be true. You only need passionate intensity and this intense subjective commitment to it for it to be true. Kierkegaard said so. He declared that if a man, knowing no better, worships an idol, but does it with absolute sincerity, and with all the feeling and conviction in his being, he is nearer the truth than the enlightened individual who has a correct knowledge, but holds this knowledge at arm's length, remaining unmoved by it. Okay, so if it's only personal, and it's only something within and internal, and it doesn't have to line up with anything outside of us, then of course, then whatever a person, if they truly come to absolute sincerity and passion. Now here's the question. Now notice this phrase, if a man knowing no better worships an idol, but does it with absolute sincerity. Is it possible to worship an idol with absolute sincerity?
In your own heart you can. As far as what you can understand yourself, you can worship it with true sincerity.
Okay. If the Bible's our reference point, let's think of a couple scriptures here. Hebrews 11:6 says, "But without faith it's impossible to please Him, but He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him." If a person is truly seeking God, do you suppose it's in the nature of God to reward a person with an idol?
No.
Okay. There's a difference between sincerity or honesty and passionate commitment, isn't there? A person can totally be committed to something and passionately involved, but not sincere. Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 13, what does it say? God speaks, He says, "You shall seek me, and you shall find me, when you shall search for me with all of your heart." Got wonderful stories about hearing about people when they cry out in desperation and how God has met them and led them. One of you shared that in your testimony. Well, it was Donnie. Just, if I can use him as an illustration, there he's in just an intense crying out for God, or just his ache was there for something, and what happened? There was the Bible right there, you see. And see God's faithfulness just to make available for a person to have something to begin to respond to. There was a story about a man studying under a guru in India, and he's trying to seek out higher levels of knowledge, and so he asks questions and they refer him to another higher authority, and finally he says, well, who is I got this idea, I want to go all the way to the top. Well, who's the highest authority? You know, and why don't I talk to the head honcho? And at that point, my view would be that the Holy Spirit spoke to him, and he says, it's Jesus. And immediately thought, well, if it's Jesus, what am I doing here? And so he left his pursuit of the meditations and involvement with the spiritual master he's left, and he traveled from India back down into Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, he came down with hepatitis, deathly ill. There was a ministry there that took him in and started ministering and caring for him and loving him, and they were Christians. That was the Dilaram ministry led by Floyd McClung, and God led him there to see where he could find truth, and he became a Christian, came into the reality that God had led him for. There's a wonderful story about a man in the 1800s in Africa. We'll refer to more of it a little bit later, but his name was Samuel Morris, and how when he cried out for, he was at the point of being put to death by a fierce warring tribe, and he cried out, and God miraculously delivered him and healed him and led him for several days through the jungle until he came to a Methodist mission compound, and there he came to relationship with the true and living God. So God does not reward a person with an idol. God is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And Jeremiah 29:13 says, you shall seek me and you shall find me when you search for me with all of your heart. Okay, do you have any questions at this point? All right, we've looking here at the subject called the rise of existentialism. We want to talk about what existentialism is. In the last session we talked about how in the late 1700s there was a tremendous press to have science be the absolute, to verify and to prove what is true and to accept what is true, what is science. There became an upper culture that looked with scorn the idea that the Bible would be true. There was and in the 1800s there came to be attacks in the Bible. One is an attack of higher criticism that talks about, questions the historical reliability of the Bible. In the 1800s there came the development of evolution and a different view between what evolution presented about creation and what was the accepted Christian understanding of what they believed the Bible presented about evolution. And so then that question about if the Bible really is teaching something different from evolution, then who should you believe? And so you have questioning about the history of the Bible, and then you have questioning about related to the area of the physical world as well. And so you have this tremendous struggle. And there's a press toward, nevertheless, Kierkegaard making a press toward a personal commitment to God, to identify, to be passionately involved with an idea for which he could live or die. And now in 19th century Europe then, you think in Denmark had a state church, and in the state church, to become a Christian, you were born in Denmark and you were baptized into the state church, and that defined you as being a Christian. So you were a Christian automatically without ever deciding whether you wanted to be one or not. And so in a place where there was just this abstract intellectual assent to something that you said you believed to be true, it seemed appropriate for Kierkegaard to say there's got to be something more than just intellectual words. There has to be a passionate commitment to something. The challenge was the problem that this idea, Kierkegaard went too far, and so perhaps if personal Pete came to Kierkegaard for advice, for religious counsel, Kierkegaard would demand that Pete let his personal ideas about God transform his entire existence in relationship thereto. He says Christianity wishes to intensify passion to its highest pitch, but passion is subjectivity. Kierkegaard demanded passionate action. For him, it was not important for you to analyze life, but instead he would press you to get passionately involved in it. Don't sit around all day analyzing and studying. Get passionately involved. Do something. See? Get involved in action. Now, it's very much on my heart that we would have analysis to be able to see a clear understanding of what is the wise action to take, and then passionately involves yourself in the action to see the application of that truth. But we need time both in the theory and the activity. And if you separate one from another, you're going to have a problem depending upon which one you leave out. Okay? And the logical conclusion of humanistic reason had been people are machines, molecules controlled by causation. But for Kierkegaard, this was an unacceptable answer, because he says, as long as I live, I make a change by the choices I make. And so this model, when you describe this model and try to make the whole universe a system in which everything fits into the system, you have left me out, because I change things by the choices that I make. And it's an unacceptable answer, and therefore he declares we need to seek for a realization of significance and value of people independent from any intellectual understanding. And so seek to find a new truth, a pure subjective feeling of truth with no understandable connection with anything outside yourself. Focus on your own existence. Find an inner knowingness within yourself. What is true for you does not need to be true for anything else. It's a blind leap of faith. No way to know if you should believe what you believe. There's no standard. You simply must decide what is true for you, and don't worry about your subjectivity lining up with any walls in the room where you live. And from this came a movement called that extended out from this idea. It's not Kierkegaard himself, but extending out from possibly a misapplication of what he was really teaching, but nevertheless came out as they pushed this idea of subjectivity to its logical conclusion, and they push it to the idea of existentialism. So existentialism focuses upon, I'm not going to be concerned about anything outside myself. I'm going to focus upon my own existence. And somewhere in my own existence, in the depth of my being, I'm going to come to a knowingness, something that I know. It'll be something that I have, which doesn't have to be something that I can explain, because I can't maybe understand it. And if you don't understand something, you can't explain it. And but it's going to be something that it's just real to me. And a teacher of existentialism or teachers, of course, discussing existentialism at New York University. His name's William Barrett. And William Barrett made a statement that our Western world has faltered. Our Western world has faltered. We are not sure anymore that we know what truth is. We're not sure anymore that we know what man is. And we don't know in this century what blind forces can disturb or destroy his so-called humanity. And so, therefore, people are looking for something that is within themselves, and the Western world has come to something that's very close in its thinking to what occurred in pantheism, the idea that everything is God, of Eastern religions. And Barrett writes, in neither India nor China, nor in the philosophies that these civilizations produced, was truth located in the intellect. On the contrary, Indian and Chinese sages insisted upon the very opposite, that man does not attain truth so long as he stays locked up inside his intellect. And just the whole press, to come into reality, you've got to come into something that you do not understand. You blindly commit yourselves to something. And so soon as people are willing to accept the idea that they can blindly commit themselves to it, even though it would be contrary to what their understanding is saying, then they are open to just submit themselves blindly to some experience, and they'll blindly accept demonic experience, won't they? And so here is the door to the occult movement, the New Age movement that is occurring in the Western world. So it's a different view and different approach to knowing than what we've looked at so far, because what we have talked about so far is that in the biblical view had the focus of a unity of truth, and that it would be something that was, you could use reason to understand, but you had to have an absolute, and that absolute was the Bible. God had to give us, God had to verify what is true, and so when we needed to find out what is true, we needed to go and ask God. And say, God can say that's right. Now God's able to say that's right, again, because He has that total understanding of all existing reality. And He sees things in correct perspective. For traditional Western humanism, they had the idea of unity of truth and the use of reason. And they understood the necessity of absolutes, but your absolute was one they had to come up with, and our modern world had, in the last 2 centuries, it looked to science to be that absolute. And now more and more it spread out the idea that science can't prove what is true, and you don't, even if science says something is true, more and more people are saying, well, I don't know whether to believe it or not. Because even though science says it's true, it doesn't mean it's true. And this would leave you with a picture, if you just stopped right there, a picture of I'm a bunch of molecules, and everything in this physical world is brought by causation, so the question you ask is what causes a man to do what he does, and you're just caused to do whatever you do, and that's just, it makes you the same as a robot that's moved roundabout. And some people said there's got to be more significance to me than that. I can't be just a machine. If I can't have an understanding, then perhaps there is a realm, and here's where we come into an existential humanism. Existential humanism, where they just said there's 2 different kinds of truth. There's one kind of truth that you think about, and this relates to science, reason, and objectivity. This area of truth, so that when I'm in a scientific laboratory, I'll think about how much chemicals to put into a particular mixture that I'm experimenting with. And when I'm driving my car, I'll think about keeping my car on the correct side of the road as I drive. And I'll have to think about it when I go to stop at a traffic light, and I'll have to notice whether the light is red or if it's green. And so that'll be an area that involves thinking, involves understanding, but then there will be another realm of my existence which relates to my meaning and a sense of my significance and values that you can't think about. You're just going to have to realize some other way, and this will be then a realm of faith, feeling, and undefinable experience. And so here then becomes a complete separation between reason and faith, and feeling and thinking, and subjectivity and objectivity. It's like there's a great big huge cement wall built between them that's 1,000 feet thick and 1,000 miles high, and it has electric wire, barbed wire on the top of the wall, charged with 100,000 volts of electricity. So you can't get from one side to the other. When you're driving a car, you need to be in this realm. And when you're thinking about going to church or going to a philosophy class, or thinking about the meaning and significance of your existence, you need to be in this area. And so this is something that you can understand and think about, and here's something you just got to have a non-logical realization of. And so this is going to be a blind search for a non-logical realization of truth. And this will be something that's just simply an inner knowingness, just an inner knowingness that just relates to you, and it will be your own truth. And the idea here is everybody is entitled to their own truth, and what is true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me, and I don't have to worry about it being true for anybody else, but true for me, as long as it's real to me. Okay, and so if you're going to come into you're not going to be trying to understand this area. You're going to trying to experience it. Come into that experience. Now when Jolene and I, when Jolene had her first child, Paul was born. She was pregnant with Paul. We're going to birth classes, for natural childbirth classes, and in that class, every single session, the lady who was instructing the course would say something about how possible different aspects about having the birth, and she says, well, it's your own experience, and you need to make this experience special to you. And after a few weeks, I began to wonder whether we're going to have an experience or going to have a baby. See, because the focus was on experience. See, and the idea there, though, is to have an experience. But if you're going to enter into an experience that gives you a sense of meaning and significance and value of your life, if you're going to try to get some experience that will confirm that to you, how do you go about doing it? Different philosophies and different people have suggested different ways. There was a philosopher in Switzerland named Karl Jaspers, and he says that you can't make it happen, you just wait for it. And he called it, it's a final experience. In other words, it's final or an ultimate experience, something that is so profound that I guess the only way I know how to describe it, I guess you would say, I know I should be alive, and I'm glad I'm alive. Okay, and my life has meaning. And he says you just have to wait for it, and then in his classes he would instruct his students, don't commit suicide, because if you commit suicide, you have no guarantee that you will have this experience in the process of suicide. So he's assuming that that he's really serious about this, and he's assuming that he's got students in his class who are serious enough about it that he might even try suicide in the pursuit of it. Another man, a French philosopher in the 20th century, Jean-Paul Sartre, was really a primary mover of the spread of this philosophy of existentialism, and he says that you must bring about, authenticate your existence, or that, in my words, it would be bring meaning and significance to your life. You have to do it. You simply choose to act, and you make of your life whatever your life will be by the choices that you make. And so you decide what you're going to do, and the significant thing is that you choose, that you actually go into action and do something. He says it doesn't matter what you do, because there is no understandable way to define what is rightness or wrongness of any action. So there's no standards to say what choices you should make, so it's not what you choose, but the fact that you simply choose. So for example, you may see an elderly woman walking down the road in the rain. And so as you see her walking in the rain, you can stop your car and give her a ride to get her out of the rain, or you can run over her with a car, just drive right over her. See, either way you get her out of the rain, don't you? See, but it's not what you do, but the fact that you choose to act. Aldous Huxley said you should do it, come into this meaning by using drugs. And in the process of the experience that you have, your hallucination that you have in drugs, you will find an inner reality in those drug experiences. And so there's where you're going to find an inner reality. And he was involved in drugs. He had his wife promise him that she would give him LSD on his deathbed so that he could die in the midst of a drug trip. And so in relationship with this, in the 1960s then, when the drug movement began in the United States and in San Francisco in the Haight-Ashbury district, and related to University of California at Berkeley, a professor there named Timothy Leary. And Timothy Leary popularized an expression at that time, and they just said, turn on, tune in, and drop out. Turn on to all your inner truth by using drugs. So you turn on with drugs, you tune in to your inner truth, and you drop out of society. And so there's a tremendous dropout of society going on at that point, where people would drop out, and they rejected the culture that was at that time, and you had the expansion of the hippie movement, and out of the hippie movement there were many from there that traveled then on to Europe, and traveled down through Europe, on through Afghanistan, on to India, in the pursuit of studying of Eastern religions. And then coming out of that has been the roots of the New Age. See, the New Age really, there's nothing new about the New Age at all. All it is old Hinduism expressed. Okay, but then we give other possibilities, but there's just some examples. It doesn't matter what you do, but the fact that without understanding, you're trying to find a subjective truth, that a truth is true for you, that you can't understand, that goes beyond understanding, and that's not going to be a process of reasoning or thinking about. It's something that's beyond thinking. So we've touched upon the horrendous problems that come if we try to tear objectivity and subjectivity apart. It destroys the proper relationship between faith and reason. And in our next section we'll talk about what is the proper relationship of faith and reason